Hi, I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot. I just returned from interviewing Captain Mark Richards of the Secret Space Program, and this was my third interview with him. I go to Vacaville, Northern California, and we go to a prison. I'm accompanied by his wife, Joanne Richards, and it's actually not that fun to go to a prison, as you can appreciate, but at the same time it's worth it because Mark Richards is an amazing man and has really a huge amount of information about the Secret Space Program and what's really going on. So this is going to be my overview, I guess you might say, of my total recall of this particular interview. And let me see. What we do is we have a pencil. They do allow us a pencil, so Joanne takes notes and I take some notes, and basically then I compile sort of a written transcript, which I will also post on the page, and then I deliver this sort of overview of the entire thing. So bear with me, and I will go through it with you, and you will sort of be able to sort of see, if you watch all three interviews, a progression of information that is substantial and really sort of paints a picture that can give you a better understanding of what's really going on. So first of all, when I arrived, we talked about Robin Williams' death, and that was a very key area because Mark and Robin Williams were good friends. They went to college together, as it happens, and he was in correspondence with Robin up until when his current wife stopped the correspondence. So I don't know exactly why she did that. Mark said that she didn't want Robin to have anything to do with him or to whatever, writing to someone in prison, I'm not sure. But it was very unfortunate, and he basically said that it was very suspicious, Robin Williams' death, that Robin was never suicidal even when he was very depressed, that he would not kill himself because of his children, for one thing, and also because he wanted to protect his own personal image of who he is, and so he simply wouldn't kill himself. He said he was not the kind of person to go to bed mad, that he was doing things like financially supporting SETI in the background, and that he knew a few of the secrets. He also said that he was a pretty enlightened soul in general. So he also talked about the fact that the reported information on his death did not add up. And he said that if he really was going to kill himself, he would do something much more flamboyant, like jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. But basically, he wasn't going to kill himself. So that's really crucial, and I would say that substantiates the notion that this was an Illuminati hit. He also wanted to say that there were other people that were in the know, like Lauren Bacall. He knew Lauren. He danced with her at a Mark Hopkins event in the past when he was 6 years old. His father was good friends with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Now I'm going to be going through this kind of quickly, so I apologize if it seems like a hodgepodge of information, but this is basically me asking questions and getting his answers, and then sometimes there'll be a time when we go into a little more detail in a subject. So I asked him several times to give feedback on various people out there and information coming through to get his take. One of the things he talked about was, as I've mentioned in the past, in the prior interview, he flew an artificially intelligent, biologically intelligent, not sure how you frame that, spaceship called Minerva, and he was one of the few people, if not the only person, who could fly that spaceship. She comes from another solar system altogether, and she considers herself to be a biological creation the way we are. Although, I guess in essence, she is what you might call artificially intelligent. Artificial intelligence can infect things even if they're not mechanical. He says the government keeps wraps on this and does not think the public can cope with this information and the ramifications of it. He said he thinks it's not an immediate threat on a mass scale. And he described an energy field coming down and infecting a car, for example, a modern car with an onboard computer that can be infected and then sent back to an artificial intelligence source. So he talked about the battle of the AIs, and basically Mark Richards says that yes, that's a reality, very possible that that's going on. He talked about the gas clouds in space. I had talked to Paul LaViolette and asked him about that, and I wanted to get Mark's take on all of that. And what happens is Mark says that there is actually a gas cloud at this time that is moving into our galactic center that's being swallowed the way you might say a baby would swallow, like Gerber baby food, and that there was a chance that the powers that be secret space program is concerned that it might burp out this at some point, and this energetic would actually or could threaten us and our planet. So there was concern about that. Now, he also said that there are some natural protections around Earth, like the Van Allen belt. He does not feel that we're going to be protected by ETs if this should happen. Instead, I asked him about this energetics coming from the pyramids, the top of the pyramids, that there is what I observed in Egypt is at the top of the pyramid, energy going into the Great Pyramid and or coming out. And apparently there have been photographs of pyramids with energetics around them and coming out of them recently. And in fact, I think they have a photograph of the Bosnian pyramid, which Paul LaViolette visited, as well as another group of investigators recently. And there is a person on the internet who talked about the possibility that these pyramids around the world might be being activated. So that made sense to me. And I also think, because I had seen this energetics coming out of the pyramid, although Paul LaViolette, when I told him that information, seemed to think that it was impossible to photograph that, or he hadn't seen that evidence. Whereas I've seen it with my naked eye, so I know that it's real. Now, I can say that, some people don't have what's called etheric sight. I do have that. So I don't know what other people would see. I do believe it's possible, like Carillion photography would photograph energy coming out of a pyramid. And so, anyway, I ran that by Mark, and he said that that this is similar to HARP, and that HARP is actually a pyramid under the ground, and that he thought that the idea that these pyramids around the world might be activating, as we are also discovering more pyramids, and that linking them up in a sort of protective shield through energetics might actually be something that's going on, or something that the secret space program is working on. So that did make sense to him. As I say, this is an area that still needs further investigation. I'm going to run this all by Paul LaViolette to get his further take on it, but it is quite interesting. There is no evidence at the moment, as far as I know, no known evidence in the mainstream about what is in essence the superwave that Paul LaViolette talks about. Mark is familiar with Paul LaViolette's work, and I have gotten a validation on the superwave concept, as being real. So, but we do have energetics that are happening to our planet at this time. Obviously, we've got an active sun. Solar flares are activating as we speak, and we don't really know what the future holds in that regard. But I will say that it's very possible they're doing various things to try to combat what might be extinction level events, for example, if triggered with regard to our Earth. However, I do not feel that the what you might call what has been called the kill shot from the sun is accurate. In fact, it appears that it's more happening from the galactic center and not from the sun itself, and that has been posited by others as well. So he says the galactic center is also known as Sagittarius A, and again, this gas cloud, as he calls it, contains what he called protoplanets, which are birthing planets and stars the size of Jupiter, several light years across, being eaten by the black hole in the center of our galaxy. And this is happening as we speak. Now, I also talked to him, asked him about the Falklands War and the black goo, which had been discovered there by the Marconi scientists, and there are at least 25 of them which died in very mysterious ways surrounding that story. And I've done a number of live stream interviews with other people, including investigators such as David Griffin, on this subject. Now, Mark did acknowledge the black goo, and I have had other witness behind the scenes testimony talking about it being artificially intelligent. It is also what the Gulf spill, oil spill, was all about as well. And what they're really combating is this black goo, apparently, which, by the way, is why they're using the core exit. Now, this is not from Mark. This is from other witnesses I have. However, I talked to him about the Falklands War. He basically said that was right around the time when he wanted to recover. That was right around the time when he wanted to retire from the secret space program. He had lost one child and what he said was a great love of his to the secret space program by that time, and was very fed up and tired, very exhausted, wanted to resign from the secret space program. But it appears that they did not want him to, and this is part of the reason he was framed in this murder charge that he was not involved in. So that's very interesting. Now, he talked about wreckage, evidence of the incidents in which he talks about and have been discussed on other interviews with me. He said that planets such as the Mars, Moon, and others have evidence, and that you can even see that in telescopes. So if you train your telescope to certain areas, you will see debris there. The government counts on the masses to forget what they see because of fear, and also fear of not fitting in and being seen as crazy. And we discussed that this is a huge problem with humanity, that humanity has a huge desire to fit in, and that they practically don't need much programming in order to facilitate making sure that they that they are able to. The government basically counts on the masses forgetting because of fear and fear of not fitting in, being seen as crazy, and they don't worry so much about programming them on a mass scale, simply because the desire to fit in and not be seen as crazy is what keeps them from investigating the truth in our world. He also says the CIA relies on the same energetic and desire of human beings to fit in, and so they use this basically to control us. And now, obviously, movies, TV, and the lies in the news are contributing to this overall sort of mass amnesia and a fear-based paradigm. Then he also wanted to remind me, as he said in the prior interview, that raptors are funding movies and television there's this latest dinosaur traveling event, which is called, what's it called?
I don't know. Walking with Dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah. He also talked about the recent traveling show called Walking with Dinosaurs. That's this event in which small dinosaurs like raptors are mixed in with other dinosaurs, and that he said that some real raptors are actually showing up and participating. Obviously, they're not going to have the ones with human feet, you know, motivating the mechanical object, but they look very real, and therefore people aren't able to tell the difference. So it's just something they like to do, something they consider fun. By the same token, they show up at places like Comic-Con every year, apparently, and he says that a lot of ETs show up at Comic-Con. It's considered to be great fun. Obviously, some are in disguise, some are covered by hoods and that kind of thing. Let's see. There was August 28th, 1953, a major UFO sighting in San Rafael where the raptors conducted what was in essence a christening ceremony of sorts. To celebrate Mark's birth, they believe the first 2 months of life, the spirit or soul is not present, and they waited until this date to have a ceremony around Mark's birth. I asked why raptors chose Mark and his family. He said they appreciate humans with raptor-like courage. His father, whose name is Ellis Lloyd Richards, also known as the Dutchman, was a combination of highly admirable qualities, courage, intelligence, and honor. And the raptors apparently appreciate that. So they contacted him. His father was also, of course, deeply involved in the secret space program and very highly regarded there. He said his father was his role model, and his father has passed on. The Dragon leader, a raptor, met with Ellis Richards, the Dutchman, at Hamilton Air Force Base, August 1952, and they, at that time, were very impressed with his honorable qualities and as a military leader. He said that the raptors rent castles in the United Kingdom, that the Home Office there negotiates with them, that they choose ones that are in out-of-the-way places like Scotland or heavily guarded. He said that even the guards don't see them. They often don't know who they're guarding. They may form a perimeter on the outside. He said the raptors have a sorcery, he called it, that can basically cloud the human mind and make them forget what they've seen. They do not like to go interdimensional. He said they're very much here in this dimension, because I was very curious whether since there aren't that many sightings of raptors, whether they went into interdimensional, but apparently not so much. He said Earth is the home planet of the raptors. 65 million years ago, they left Earth during a cataclysm to colonize space using stolen technology from another ET race. He said they didn't totally understand the tech they were using. They spent a very long time being caught on the inner ring of the galactic center, Sagittarius A. And in fact, just recently, the physicist, what was his name?
Stephen Hawking.
Oh, yeah. The physicist Stephen Hawking talked about there being an inner ring to the galactic center. And he said they actually stayed with a ship poised on that ring for quite some time. In other words, possibly even thousands of years, our time. And finally figured out they needed to voyage further. Their homeworld, they selected a homeworld in the Draco constellation, and it is now called Dragon World. Apparently, we have not found that planet yet. Now, the princess of the raptors, according to Mark, and the raptors themselves are the only reason we're still in existence, because she decided to align her race with ours. Now, I have to say that I don't think this is quite true, because we have multiple layers of ETs and higher, dimensional beings that are also very interested in keeping this human experiment going. But he seemed to think that we owe a great debt to them, the raptors, for keeping us alive at this time and protecting us from a lot of other beings that don't, basically want to see our demise. There are 4 species of reptilians: the Chikar, which have wings and are considered to be royalty; the humanoid type with no tails; lizard-like beings that do have a tail; and then the raptors that are on Earth, which are actually, the reptoids. And the reptoids are another species of raptor that remained behind, apparently, or actually went to the Moon and Mars, terraformed those planets, and stayed there for quite some time, and then came back to Earth, and have also gone out and settled other moons and planets in various solar systems. He said our Earth-like germs are very deadly to reptilians, but that anybody on Earth has developed some immunity. Let's see. He said, we talked about the blue grays that are near New Zealand. He said they're not robots, and they normally live undersea, in undersea bases, and they currently have a positive relationship with humans. There is a very strong, large contingent of grays that are sort of robotic and reptoid, and he basically discounts them and does not really spend any time sort of dealing with them. I can say that there are other kinds of grays, and some of which are actual, biological entities that have a history and so on, including the blue grays. Now, as far as the reptoids are concerned, they're descended from the raptors. They developed on their own bases on the Mars and Moon. They look like tall basketball players. They come from royal bloodlines, can hide their tails or have none. They eventually left for further out in space, from Mars and Moon, and they're more susceptible to human germs than we are. I think it's possible that the Japanese royalty, as well as the royal bloodlines, are also possibly related to those particular reptoids. Now, the raptors say there is a serious agenda, apparently, according to Mark. He believes that Ebola is all about eradicating large number of reptoid species. And just to clarify, the reptoids and the raptors are at war with each other. So that's part of why the raptors have aligned themselves with us. They also looked in the future, and this is on my prior interview. The princess looked into the future of her race and saw that if the raptors align themselves with human, they have a very positive future. If they don't, their future is less positive. So at this time, they are honoring their treaties, and they are basically siding and working with our military. Now, the Ebola virus, he believes, is all about eradicating large numbers of reptoid species. He believes they have large bases in both Mali and West Africa. He thinks the West African base was recently decimated by Ebola. And he did say that the reptoids backed Hitler, the Japanese, and are backing ISIS. They break treaties. They're still involved in the Dulce base. They have 1 base in Iran and 3 bases in Africa. They meet in grottos under the Vatican, which is an alien ambassadorial colony under the protection of the Vatican and the Swiss Guard. There are no weapons allowed. They use agents within the human race to weaken humans. And regarding the Swiss Guard, it's important to understand that the Swiss are therefore very much read in what's really going on, obviously. Working closely with the Vatican in this case. He said that a SAR bomb was used in 1961 to blow up an alien base in Russia and the Arctic. He said that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were blown up because of a huge reptoid base underneath those cities, and that is crucial information, and I don't believe has ever been out in any other form on the internet. He said that the Japanese believe their royal bloodline comes from the stars, and he says it is related to the reptoids. He doesn't believe the reptoids are directly involved in the U.S. military, and I would sort of put a caveat here because he has been out of the loop for 30 years. He does get information. He still has contacts in the military, etc. But I also will say that his contacts and his sort of back channel information will come from what we know of as white hats. I believe that the U.S. military is infiltrated by reptoids at this point, and the sort of Nazi bent of the U.S. government and the laws that have been passed indicate that. But that's kind of not something that Mark is really exposed to at this time. He did say that von Braun is and was a devoted Nazi, and that he never severed ties with them. He said that reptoids don't get involved with missile technology. They consider that old school and that it's very antiquated, and that they've only been helping with flying saucers and the Nazi bell. Now, back several years ago in CAMELOT, Bill Ryan and I flew to Poland and went to visit one of the sites of the henge, which is where one of the bells could have been constructed, and shot a video there and interviewed Igor Witkowski, who is a German investigator into the Nazi bell. That is a time travel device, and it also pertains to Montauk. We talked about the Nazis, paperclip, and the atomic bomb, and he said by the time we cleared the Nazi scientists a la paperclip, that the work on the Manhattan Project was pretty much done, that the Nazis didn't leave, most of the Nazis didn't leave prison camps in Europe until December of 1944. He said that the Germans would not have been told what the nukes were for, and so we're talking about the three main original nukes that were created. And then he said that the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima was carried out without their knowledge, but they got involved later in mass producing nuclear bombs. And he said that the Japanese couldn't continue the war at that time without the superior help from reptoid groups. He said they desperately needed fuel, nuclear power, etc., and that 3 countries during World War II had deals with the reptoids: Italy, Germany, and Japan. He said that the reptoids have bases above and below the ground. So I was very interested in why Japan continues to be targeted a la Fukushima, and Mark was very reticent to talk about what was really going on there. Apparently it's too, he tends to be willing to talk about historical events, but he tends to not talk about current events as much. He said that the Japanese and North Korean are very involved with many groups, including the reptoids, but he won't say any more about that. He said the Chinese are working with 3 groups. He said there are groups of Chinese that are trying to save their country. He said the price for alien help is high. They want humans in exchange for food, humans for food, breeding, work, and to use them to fight off planet. He said human soldiers are being recruited to fight off planet. They are basically being given a kind of a paradise in space in exchange for doing farming, mining, and fighting. And they are able to live in beautiful cities off planet and various terraformed planets and have luxuries, etc., in exchange for fighting for them. He also said that there were many soldiers that were being utilized in our military that have no idea they're going off planet. Their minds are wiped multiple times, and they are also They think they're going to Afghanistan or Iraq, but in reality are going off planet. He was hesitant to say why the US and Israel hit Fukushima, but he did say that the royal family was related to reptoids. Regarding the Aldebaran, the beings from Aldebaran who helped the Nazis and Africa, Gordon Duff had been claiming that Africa is being given to a race from Aldebaran who worked with the Nazis. And he said that they had destroyed their home planets, in fact 2 of them, and they needed a place for their people to go. Mark says we aren't giving all of Africa to them, just creating very large bases in both Africa and Siberia. He said they look Nordic. I have a secret witness who claimed that they were changing the color of their skin as they came on, were landing in places like South Africa, and that immigration rules were showing an influx of black Africans that were highly educated, and they had no way to trace where they were from. And I ran this by Mark. Mark does not think, he thinks that we have the technology to change our skin color, but that he believes the Nordic race from Aldebaran wouldn't maintain this long after arriving, even if it is happening. He did say that according to Mark, we have beat them back from our shores before. He said Africa has been the site of several battles with off-planet races, and that much of the violence in South Africa is alien-induced due to mind control or buying off of people. In other words, paying them for violence. So now regarding mining the earth, some people wanted to know, that they basically thinks, why bother? Why would aliens want to mine earth? And Mark said the earth is very easy to mine in large quantities. It's resource rich, has gravity, whereas say mining off an asteroid with no gravity makes it very difficult. He said oxygen, food, and gold, and the temperatures are not as harsh here. So this makes us, the Earth, a good solid base for mining. He said also it's easy to relax here for alien species. That's how he put it. Okay, I asked him about Val Thor, who came from Venus and was said to have gone to meetings in the Pentagon many years ago. He said that Val Thor was a legitimate visitor from space, that he was from Venus. Mark said he met a female from that group and got to know her a bit, and that Venus is actually a great place in 65 other dimensions, but not in this one. And that the dimension, the Venus that Val Thor came from, is in another dimension. He also said that they wanted to move their species here to colonize. He said, but Mark was somewhat suspicious of their actual intentions beyond that, and that he didn't necessarily think they had our best interests in mind. We talked about the UN, a specific organization called UNESCO, and also the head of the UN, and he said that since 1947, it's been involved in negotiating with aliens regarding setting up bases on Earth, and that certain international corporations demand to be represented in those meetings, including companies like Bechtel and others. One can extrapolate and imagine others such as Lockheed Martin, etc. Certainly aerospace companies, but I'm sure there are others. Westinghouse, all of these, the usual suspects, you might say. He said no one person knows everything and it's a constantly changing picture. Regarding his security oath, he said many security agreements now state that the info, if the info is on the internet and known by the public, it's okay to talk about it. So I guess he uses that somewhat as an sort of barometer for what he can and can't talk about. We talked about Gary McKinnon. I have interviewed Gary, and I wanted to talk to him about Solar Warden, which Gary McKinnon found evidence of, which are fleet-to-fleet transfers and lists of non-terrestrial officers. And Mark said that he knows a solar warden by the name Pine, P-I-N-E. And I did not get what those initials stand for, unfortunately, which I will try to do in the future. Gary did find evidence, and he says that the evidence he found was because the security would have been very lax. He said back in those days the military computers were unreliable and that security was lax in both the Pentagon and NASA, because in part of their arrogance they felt that that humans as a rule would simply not be able to figure it out and be able to hack their computers. He said that Ellis Richards, Mark's father, was involved in setting up the internet relays to universities back in the early days. I asked him about Bill Cooper because I wanted to know if I thought maybe they had known each other, and sure enough, he said that he was friends with Bill Cooper, that he knew him for a very long time, that they went to naval class in. They attended the same naval classes in Hawaii, and Mark spoke very highly of Bill Cooper. I ran a story that John Lear has told us about Bill Cooper basically sort of going off the deep end ultimately, but also getting something called UFO disease, where he said people start running out of stories, so they start making things up. He said that he doesn't believe Bill Cooper would have done that. He said that Bill Cooper was killed, was set up, and that it's very possible that he was mind controlled towards the end of his life to reverse his position on the ET question as a result of mind control. He said Cooper knew a great deal, and he was very dedicated as a whistleblower, and he started out very carefully and eventually widened the amount of information he was giving to the public, basically because he began to understand the sort of deeper service to humanity that he was part of. And I think that Mark also sees himself in that light. He did know of Phil Schneider, but he doesn't know him personally, he said. Regarding MJ-12, he said that it is made up of the existing power structure. He said sometimes they give orders to other organizations, but MJ-12 has many people above it as well, giving orders to them. Mark said that Truman actually established in 1947 something called IS, that was supposed to be a fast-acting international organization to deal with the alien civilization and the off-world threat, as he called it. He said he did not call IS the same organization as MJ-12, for what it's worth, and seemed to infer that that was a different organization altogether. Project Moondust, he was part of Project Moondust, which is the crash and ET retrieval and reverse engineering of spacecraft, off-planet spacecraft. He said he was involved in that. He said a lot of reverse engineering is handled by corporations, not controlled by Congress, and that he was involved in tracking ETs and possibly securing them similar to Torchwood, and information related to what Tony Dodd, our Camelot witness, who came forward talking about Torchwood and the truth of those agents that are going around arresting and picking up ETs that are walking among us. Now, he also talked about the TSA scanners and said there are the dogs that are supposed to be smelling for drugs are actually looking for ETs. They're not looking for drugs. And so contrary to what people think, and the TSA scanners are actually used to determine whether you're human. Not for all the other reasons they say they're using them. I asked him about Danny Casolaro and Promise Software, The Trail of the Octopus. He said he knew Danny Casolaro, and he said yes, he was set up and he was killed. But he was on the right track in regard to his investigations. He talked about corporations supplying parts for the military, how they can't be trusted because a lot of the corporations are working with various ET groups, and there could be backdoors. The parts can be designed to fail at some critical juncture or have a built-in obsolescence, and that there are many ET sort of corporate alliances in the background. He said there were numerous electromagnetic entities that are vast and seem to run things on planet Earth. He did not seem to be referring to an artificial intelligence when he reported this, so I'm not sure what he meant by that, and I will have to delve deeper into that statement. He said he knew Ben Rich of Skunk Works, Lockheed Skunk Works, and he also worked with him. Now, I asked him about the Archons, specifically the ET that ran the Dulce base that is talked about in Sean David Morton's excellent book, Sands of Time, which is the compiled testimony from a whistleblower put into fictional form to protect that whistleblower and who's passed on, and his family, actually to protect his family. To protect the whistleblower's family. Mark has read the first book, liked it very much, and said it's mostly accurate. I asked him whether the ET that was running the Dulce base was actually an Archon, because the description of him sounds very much like the description that I understand to be Archons as described in the Nag Hammadi texts and elsewhere. And he said either that or an Aldebaran. He said it was from a race that claimed to be from 2 royal houses that claimed to run our solar system. He does not necessarily buy that, though, that the royal houses are running our solar system. He talked about the lumping together of all one species, various ET species under one, and that does an injustice to many of the species and to our understanding about what's really going on. And one example of that I brought up was the tall whites, because there have been a lot of articles recently talking about the tall whites, even on Veterans Today, that have a misconstrued notion that the tall whites were working with the Nazis. And in fact, they were not. They're a different group, and they have bases in Nevada. They do work with our military from time to time. They are a non-aggressive race of beings, very well described in the Charles Hall books called Millennium, something about Millennium, and I will get the title and put it here. He said that the tall whites keep to themselves, are not threatening to humans unless provoked. And lumping them in with the so-called those from Aldebaran, the Nazi group, is a great injustice to that particular race of beings. Mark was present at the Interstellar Treaty Conference, but he considers himself to have been a soldier, and he doesn't know all the ET races or the committees that were present. That is referring, I believe, to the Exeter Conference that he reports on in his written reports that are published on the EDH website. That's the Earth Defense Headquarters website, which is maintained and created by his wife, Joanne Richards. She's also a speaker on the circuit, talking about Mark and compiling those reports. They're excellent reports, by the way, and I highly recommend people interested in Mark Richards and his testimony get hold of those reports. Obviously, she does charge for them. It takes a great deal of work and trouble to create those reports, and they're very low priced. That money does help support Joanne while Mark is in prison, and keep their operation going. Androids. There are many androids that are a risk. We have a risk of them replacing those in power. He acknowledged that risk. He said the Joint Chiefs are checked weekly and give up what he called biological material to verify that they are still human. He said that there are also androids in the Congress and that certain members maybe have been transitioned into androids, or replaced by androids, however you want to put that. I asked him about Amarna in Egypt, which is, I believe, the site of an atomic bomb relatively recently in history, to cover up the evidence of the kingdom of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. I went there in person and saw the devastation, and have also recall of the beauty of that place from the past. He agreed that King Tut is not their legitimate biological heir, and that Akhenaten and Nefertiti were two different ET races, which is something I basically came across on a psychic level, and was curious whether he would substantiate that from his own knowledge. He said that the New World Order destroys and covers up ET evidence from before 10,000 years ago all over the earth to keep humans in the dark about their history. And along those lines, we talked about Zep-Tepi, which he said is an almost nearly undisturbed gate system, a system of stargates, and that there are carvings on the various pillars there depicting beings from various planets. Many are not human, some in full spacesuits and armor, like the raptors are depicted on those pillars. He said it was once buried 8,000 years ago by the humans. He said that it might be buried up again in the near future, and that if that happens, humanity will be set back significantly. He wanted to make very clear that it is a gate complex and not a temple, and that they are active gates leading to multiple off-planet destinations and homeworlds of various races. He said that the governments and New World Order do not want people to know about this place, and that there are many other important ancient sites in Turkey that they would like destroyed or hidden that contain a great deal of important knowledge for humanity. There are two different races from Sirius, the blue humanoids, which are a positive race, and they're a very tall blue race that I tapped into when I was traveling through India. I was able to time travel back in time and was seeing that blue race in abundance there at that time. The reptilians are also a race of reptilians that are from Sirius, and they can be difficult, as he put it, but they helped the Babylonians way back in time. This basically sounds like a branch of the Anunnaki called the Syrian Anunnaki, and those reptilians are depicted on the temples in Egypt as well. He talked about three authors, Gene Roddenberry, Arthur C. Clarke, and Isaac Asimov. They were all read in on the secrets and wrapped them into their novels. He said his father knew all three. He said Mark knew Arthur C. Clarke. Now, regarding dimensional travel through portals and wormholes, he said that we have the tech to travel through them, but he doesn't think that we necessarily have the tech to go what is called quantum teleportation, because our ships are unable to interact unless they are artificially intelligent with the wormhole. But he did say that our bodies could travel because we have an intelligence that allows us to assist in reconfiguring our physical body and atomic structure on the other side. He said another way of traveling is time shifting or sliding, in which we take our body with us. We talked about Phobos, a moon off of Mars, and he said it is in non-human hands. It's 2/3 artificial, hollow. He acknowledged there's a race of non-humans that run it, and they are supported by some humans in positions of I think tech, using computers, and also security. He referenced the recent comet flyby on Mars and said that basically, actually it was targeting Mars. It was shot at it, aimed at it, but it basically was shot at from on the surface of Mars and pushed further away, and that's the bright flash that people are seeing, that the base was not affected. And I actually tapped into that information psychically prior to talking to Mark, so it was interesting that he substantiated that. He said Israel is run by one race of beings and Vatican by another. The two races are at odds with each other and wish to wrap humans into fighting their battles on the ground. And he didn't want to name the race that is backing Israel. He's quite careful about that. It appears that that race is the Anunnaki. However, from my interpretation, indications are that this is a Sitchin Anunnaki race spoken about by Zecharia Sitchin in his books. He also talked about the Zimbabwe ruins and said that they were of ancient origin. And that's an amazing site. And Michael Tellinger refers to it as being a former home of Enki. And so that's quite interesting. He said there is a large non-human ruin in France, some distance from Paris, that has 90-foot walls. And they tell people it's a Roman ruin. It is actually from an off-planet race. He said ISIS is being backed by the New World Order and the reptilians. We are attacking Syria due to an active gate system there. The Israelis bombed the gates to close them. There is one in Iraq that Saddam was allowing humans to jump through, and that's why it was closed and he was taken out, among other things. And he also said that the U.S. military will never leave Iraq, and they must secure the gates, and that there is a gate complex, as discussed in the previous interview 2, in the mountains between Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Those are a moving gate system, apparently. He talked about, well, actually, I asked him about the 9 pyramids that we were told by Valery Uvarov that were built several years ago outside the city of St. Petersburg, Russia, and asked why they were really built. He said that that area is run by the female head of the FSB, and that she is the mother of one of his children, and that he could ask her. He also said that, yes, she could get him released from prison, but he would have to join the FSB, and his loyalty is with the United States. He believes in democracy, not communism, as a way of life. So obviously they have a strong philosophical difference. Regarding Mark in prison, his life is being threatened on a regular basis. He said there are many attempts on his life. He is hard to kill, and that he believes that the way he framed it was they send boys to do a monster's job. And he said, of course, there's always the chance that at some point in the future they may succeed. He is considering an offer right now that looks interesting and could result in his release in exchange for going back to work for some faction of the secret space program. He acknowledges that there could be more offers coming as a part of an effort to re-recruit him and shut him up. He said that no one except his father, Ellis Lloyd Richards, has ever been able to control him when he was young. He said there's only 2 people left living that can control Mark, Claire Booth Luce and Bobby Inman. And he said he's been told that by the powers that be that they will kill his entire family if he tries to escape prison, and that it won't be quick. I told him about, I had a psychic intuition about Bobby Ray Inman a long time ago and offered to interview him. He did not acknowledge my offer, as I knew he wouldn't, but I thought I would ask. He said that he knows Bobby Ray Inman well, and that he's one of the most in-the-know people on the planet. He is much on the level of his father, the Dutchman, he said, in terms of his knowledge and inside access. He worked for him, and he says basically, that it appeared that he thought he was a good guy. Mark says he himself is very well known within the secret space program. He is occasionally doing jobs in the secret space program, even from prison, the New World Order, for the New World Order, in order to keep them happy and to keep his family alive. Regarding Captain K, Randy Kramer, who I recently interviewed, I wanted to get Mark's take on some of his testimony. So I described, where he was based on Mars and his level of knowledge. Mark is skeptical that his commanding officer would support his disclosures. However, he does acknowledge a huge problem with the VA and soldiers in large numbers that are not accounted for in years of service and not reflected in their books, and that they may have been serving in Iraq or Afghanistan and basically going off planet. Many were likely to be mind wiped multiple times. They're very screwed up as a result, and they actually had been based off planet and don't realize it. So this does relate directly to Captain K and to his recall, and does explain some of his sketchy recall in certain areas. So that was quite good information. And it would be great if we could get Mark and Randy Kramer to meet at some point, I think. And that interview with Randy Kramer is, again, was done on live stream, is a video interview with him. He was a Marine based on Mars for, 17 years, and then another 3 years on the moon, I believe. Okay, we talked about the recent crash of the space shuttle, and he said that there are other vehicles, including the space shuttle, that had crashed and that were being interfered with to basically put a damper on the public attempts at a space program to create fear in the masses. We also talked about MH Flight 370, and he said it was pushed into a dimensional shift because 4 people on board, and one in particular, was building a time-shifting machine that was too accurate, and they had to take them out because they didn't want them to get into the hands of the Chinese, or their work to get in the hands of the Chinese. He said that they take out commercial airliners with impunity. They consider it worth it, regardless of the collateral damage to other humans. He said as a result, if he ever gets out of prison, he would never fly commercially because it's far too easy for them to take him out. He also urged me not to fly commercially, for what it's worth. He said 6 commercial planes were taken out in the last few years, including Swiss Air and John Kennedy's plane. He was killed by a nearby plane that had laser technology on board, and it had nothing to do with his personal life. He said he was an excellent pilot, and that he and his wife were very good people. Talking about the Hadron Collider in Japan that they are currently building, he said they're building it and they're paying to build it because they want the jump technology. He also referenced that there have been several cases of what he called first contact scenarios here on planet Earth with various ET races, more than people would imagine. He said that sometimes they show up at places at night like car lots, and they are interested in meeting the humans, and then what happens is it ends up in a shootout, and as a result our relations are soured with whatever race that was. He says that happens many times on our planet. We talked about the banking collapse after 2008. He said all the small banks were taken out because they keep records, good records, and that the New World Order doesn't want evidence of alien investment in banks to surface. He said there's more alien money than drug money, and that sometimes as much as 300 million or more a day is coming into banks. We also talked about the Iraqi dinar slightly, whereas he's not really familiar with what's going on there. he likened it to what happened in Lebanon. He said that situation went on for 20 years. And so he acknowledged that it probably wasn't going to pan out the way people think it is. And maybe that was a somewhat cautionary note. So at this point, that's the sum total of what I got from him at this point. I want to thank everyone for listening to this interview recall, as it were. And you can see a written transcript of the overview points that I'm covering here on the website from our pencil, from our kind of collaborated pencil notes that we took during the interview. And hopefully we will be able to talk again in the future. I do want to say that the letters I've been writing to Mark, some of which have disappeared, he never received them. Also, he apparently has written a number of answers to previous questions that we sent to him, and none of those answers arrived in the mail to me. So that's the situation. He believes they're trying to cut off his access to outsiders and to being able to talk to people via the mail. So this is in part why I need to go in person and see him in order to get further information. I want to thank Joanne Richards for making this all possible, and for her excellent website, Earth Defense Headquarters, that contains many wonderful reports written by Captain Mark Richards. And if you're interested, please do go there for more information. The URL will be posted on my page where I'm publishing this interview. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate your support. If you did enjoy this interview, I have to say that CAMELOT is in great need of funding at this time to support our operations, to pay my webmaster, and to help pay my bills, and also, as it happens, my flight to China so that I can speak there. So I hope that you will continue to support CAMELOT, and please feel free to email me your responses to this interview and to others on my website. Thank you. Hi, I'm KERRY CASSIDY from Project CAMELOT. This is a commentary on my recent interviews with Captain Mark Richards from the Secret Space program. I decided to do a commentary to cover some of the parameters of what's going on when I'm interviewing him, so people could get a general idea of the playing field that he's operating in and how it affects the testimony that I may get from him, as well as starting to understand why I choose to ask the questions I do and not others, and so on. So I'm basically going down this overview here to set the scene, if you will. And then I do highly recommend that you watch all three, what are basically interview recalls of my on the scene in Vacaville prison interview with Captain Mark Richards. Now, first of all, I want to say, for those who haven't seen the interviews, that I am not allowed to bring in any recording equipment. That's the first problem. So we are in a large room with lots of people. All the other inmates are in the same room. There's lots of talking and loud, laughter and everything that you get in a place where there's lots of humans. And we are I am there with Joanne Richards, his wife, and she is helping by taking notes using a pencil. And pencil on paper is very difficult for obviously many reasons for taking notes. And I also do some note taking during the interview myself when I have a chance. I spend around 3 or 4 hours with him. At least lately I have been. And during that time, I'm very conscious that I must remember everything he says, because otherwise it could be lost. And my whole purpose is to get the truth out to the people listening. So with that in mind, I ask him very direct questions, and it doesn't really allow for him to go into a lot of depth with regard to various things. If you can understand that in terms of total recall, my recall is going to be on the specifics as much as possible, but rather the big points he makes, and I can't literally sort of regurgitate the information verbatim. So what I am doing is trying to get the best testimony I can under the circumstances, and also to facilitate my recall of what's going on. And what has happened is that I've started to read his reports, and his reports such as the Battle of Vesta, that will be, I believe, published by his wife Joanne Richards very soon into a book. And it's an excellent report. It's really like a sci-fi story. At the same time, it contains excellent science, both conventional science and a history of space travel, as well as covering the various sciences such as physics, astrobiology, time travel, and so on, as well as various fuels that they used or experimented with to do space travel, and so on. So it's really an amazing report. And within it, of course, he has plenty of time to elaborate on various subjects. Now, my 3 interviews, again, we get very clear answers to very direct questions, but we don't get a chance to have him go into sort of waxing eloquent on the nature of space travel, for example. I encourage people to go to Earth Defense Headquarters, and I will put that URL here on the screen, and read his various reports, including the Battle of Vesta, which I'm going to reference here a few times. So within my reading of his recent report, the Battle of Vesta, what becomes clear is it's basically an autobiography written in the form of a sci-fi adventure story. And I have to say that for all intents and purposes, it appears to be mainly true. And but at the same time, because he's using that technique, I'm sure that makes it possible to get those reports out of the prison and published in the mainstream. So that's really what his objective is in that case. Now, on top of it, his wife Joanne is facilitating all of this, and it's needless to say that we are being we are being surveilled and listened to during the time when I'm there. There was quite a to-do when we wanted to even use a pencil to take notes. So for all intents and purposes, he's writing an autobiography. And it's needless to say that there are plenty of surveillance and listening devices around us at all times. And we have, again, the pressure of time regarding the questions and the depth of the questions, what is able to be facilitated within the limited time we have each time I come and visit him. Now, on top of it, I haven't had a chance during these interviews, of which there have been 3 so far, to really delve into his spiritual sort of orientation, if you will. And that does factor in to explaining where he's coming from, and might actually be very helpful if we can go down that road in the near future. So I will try to do that when the situation permits. Now, the objective of this interview is for the purposes of disclosing information about the secret space program. And within that, I just want to remind people that he has been out of the public sector now for 30 years. One of the things that is also key is that within the Battle of Vesta, in writing his autobiography, he is describing himself in ways that are very useful in trying to understand how he comes across in the interviews and who he really is and how he is known within the secret space program, within the New World Order, and why they might have been motivated to frame him in such a bizarre fashion, which is a story in itself, and I'm hoping to get more on that subject from Mark in the near future. So what we're talking about is a man who was a rebel even in the secret space program, that the only person who could really control him was his father, who was again called the Dutchman, Ellis Lloyd Richards, and some people called Rich for short. So that's very interesting. Now, within the third interview, he talks about Bobby Ray Inman and Claire Booth Luce as both being able to control him as well. But by control him, what I mean is that get him to follow orders. And in the Battle of Vesta, you'll see him becoming a rogue sort of pilot in a certain sense. Ultimately, what he does is he makes an executive decision that concerns the life of people around him, including saving humanity. And he's often, I would say perhaps he's always been victorious in this sense, and obviously he's kept himself alive in the process. So in not following orders, in some cases he was actually told behind the scenes through a certain process not to go ahead and not follow orders, as was his sort of inclination in certain cases where he felt that the orders he was being given were not really going to handle the situation properly. So that's important to know, because we're dealing with a person with a strong rebel gene, and that's a term that I coined and have spoken about. In other words, the idea that you must have a rebel gene in order to basically wake up as a human at this time and to create change on the planet. Now, the other thing that is important to understand is the playing field that whistleblowers operate in general, and this will apply to not just Mark Richards, but all the whistleblowers that Camelot has certainly interviewed and others out there. So it can be very useful to those listening to kind of keep this checklist around for those purposes of understanding what you're really getting. On the first place, it's important to understand where their loyalty and priorities and allegiances lie. For example, where they are placing their loyalty, and first and foremost. Now, that would be sort of a laundry list, but it would begin with family, friends, loved ones. After that, obviously, or along with that, is their own lives. So they want to stay alive in the process of disclosing, and they want to protect the lives of the loved ones around them. And certainly Mark Richards is no exception in this case. What I would say is, with regard to most whistleblowers, the more family or extended family they have around them, the more loved ones they have, will be the more sort of strings they have attached to them that will take a priority, let's say, over truth. So within that, there's also the aspect of whether he's a patriot or not. And he's obviously a very staunch patriot for America and England, and within that, the wider sort of alliance which makes up the secret space program of which he is a part. And then, of course, his dedication to telling the truth as a duty to humanity, and also the parameters of country, planet, solar system, saving the human race, and his allegiances within that. Now, also within that will be his alliances with various off-planet races and where they are coming from and where he aligns with them. So he's obviously not going to betray confidences either with off-planet races that he's aligned with and or with humans that he's aligned with, even within the secret space program or outside of it, say friends and colleagues in service to humanity as well. Now, there's also the idea of what is his so-called version of God or religious views or spirituality, and how does that understanding that he has weigh into all of the above that I've just spoken about. And then again, there is, on top of all of that, his overall agenda for coming forward. In Mark's case, I believe he's doing the disclosures, and he's actually said so. He's doing these disclosures so that he can get out of prison. And that he feels in pushing the envelope that he may become, to some degree, a nuisance, but at the same time be dedicating himself to the service of humanity in light of the fact that he has been locked up for 30 years. And also disclosing information that he feels humanity needs in order to fight the battle, the ongoing battle with various off-planet races that would rather take over our planet, weighing their desires to use us as food and in other ways. So, and all of those ways have been detailed in these interviews with Mark. So it's important to take a look at all of that. So with that's kind of the playing field he's operating under. Now, on top of it, there is a political playing field. So whereas most people think in terms of politics on planet Earth, they don't wrap in the politics of off-planet races who are interacting with Earth at present time, as well as interdimensionals, etc. And so all of that weighs in on how Mark is going to be reacting to my questions, giving information, and withholding information. So within that, I would say that in light of the Vesta report and other reports that I've read, I would say that Mark is telling very little compared to what he really knows, although he's certainly doing his best under the circumstances to answer my questions as honestly as possible. Now, as far as pushing the envelope with regard to his disclosures, it's important to know that he feels this disclosing of truth may facilitate him getting out of prison. In other words, the more he talks, the more chances there are that they might want to reconsider and bring him back in on a full-time basis to working for the secret space program under his a more active security oath, as it were, and to keep him busy, in essence. The idea here being that they want to keep him off the radar of the masses and away from the public in relation to these interviews that I am conducting. So he's got an interesting balance that he has to keep, and at the same time, in pushing the envelope, he can't push it so far as to have them want to take him out or take out family members. Now, there is another issue here which has to do with the fact that he was attacked the morning before I met with him the other day, and so there is clearly a certain amount of rogue players out there that are operational within the prison system that are being facilitated to actually attack him and try to kill him. So that is going on. So far, he is holding his own in that regard, but it's worth noting. On top of that, there is the issue of leverage, keeping him alive, and what kind of leverage he might be utilizing in the back channels to sort of make sure that they basically can't just outright kill him. And it seems to me, although I don't know what this leverage may be, that there is leverage. And it may be in the form of knowledge that he has put out there to other parties who are then told to release the information if for any reason he is killed, and things of that nature. This I don't know for sure, but I can say that it's a likely sort of conclusion that one may draw under these circumstances, that a person like him would find it very advantageous to have some form of leverage, back channel, that will keep him alive in prison. On top of everything else, he appears to be a very dedicated American patriot, and that's key, actually, because it also has to do with what kind of White Hat backing, if you will, he has behind the scenes to keep him going and to protect him both inside prison and outside. So, and then also to protect his family members. So this is key. And the other thing to think about is that in what would, for example, motivate him to tell me a falsehood, for example. And that is always a question with all whistleblowers. Now, most whistleblowers that I end up interviewing, the reason I interview them is because I get a strong sense that there at least some of their story is true and that it resonates. And I cannot account for all of their story, and I cannot say they never tell any untruths. But I can say, for the most part, their heart is in the right place, and they would only tell sort of disinfo enough to keep themselves alive, so to speak. And it's always a balancing act. Now, one of the things that would motivate him would be to tell a falsehood, would be to do things like steer countries or various races down the wrong path. Ones that are listening and paying attention to these disclosures that we are having, and that he might want them to think one thing when it's something else is true. So that would involve the Russians, possibly the Chinese, certainly various races such as the Reptoids, etc. And at the same time, when he's talking to me, it's very possible that from time to time he is giving me a message that he wants to deliver, or he's been told to deliver, to the outside, be it one of these sort of political adversaries, whether on Earth or off Earth. So that's another thing that's going on during the interviews. And of course, he is going to also tell a falsehood or protect information, if you want to look at it that way, if it's necessary to safeguard the secret space program, his family, himself, the sovereignty of the U.S. and of humanity, and also the supremacy of the sort of United States and England, and the Allied sort of resistance on the white hat level to the interference and invasionary forces coming from collectives, as he calls them. So that's a very real motivation. And the other thing is just plain out to mislead, as I mentioned, various alien races that we are fighting both on and off the planet. So within this, where does that leave me and or most of us in trying to learn the truth? First of all, I would say in a fairly precarious situation, but it doesn't mean to say that we're not getting very good information, and we are. And, you know, again, I believe that each of us has, in essence, a truth resonator, which will tell us when we're getting good information versus the contrary. Another thing he talks about in Vesta, the Battle of Vesta, is he is speaking about the history of NASA, and he talks about something called NEXT, which was a step-by-step program, which was a plan for space travel, I believe using conventional science and public domain information. I believe using conventional science and public domain information due to the reduction in NASA's funding that happened around the year 2000. This is well documented in the mainstream. He said, quote, "The new strategy would be one step at a time, much closer to the steady progression von Braun anticipated." And then he says, sadly, it would not take place, as by then the unhuman forces of the New World Order were firmly in power in the United States. That's key, and that's a very interesting way of putting things, and I don't know, I have to say that I don't think unhuman, the use of the word unhuman, is a typo, but I do question whether he actually meant non-human forces, because if you say that the non-human forces of the New World Order were firmly in power in the United States, in the year 2000, which in my view is certainly the case. But to get validation from him in writing and within the Vesta report is key. And that is something that that needs more investigation and more delving into with Mark. And so I also want to say that the Vesta report contains a jumping back and forth between what is a seemingly true story, and that includes raptors in space working side by side on an Orion craft with him as the captain, and also a fascinating adventure story, as I have mentioned, as well as hard science. The hard science may be science in that he may be disclosing, at least carefully, some of the true new science within the secret space program. He's also disclosing, of course, or talking about hard science that might be conventionally understood in terms of history. So I would say that the adventure story, sci-fi, and the entire report would be something that would make a great movie, and that it would probably please both George Lucas and James Cameron, who are directors who are fully in the know, apparently, in terms of the ET reality and what we're dealing with here on Earth. Now, there is a gap between what the secret space program science entails and what he is writing about. Obviously, he's not going to be revealing science that would then give certain key elements away to either unfriendly alien groups and or unfriendly governments around the world. And so this is key again. So all of this adds up to the idea that he is basically playing a very careful and delicate game in disclosing from prison the way he is. And I can also say that we are very privileged to be able to get this kind of information from him, and that he is also being very clever in the way that he puts out the various reports and they contain information that's highly that may be highly secret, and in some cases putting it out covertly in such a way that it will go under the radar, not only of the prison guards, but also under the notice of people who are trying to curb his enthusiasm and courage in disclosing the truth to humanity as best he can at this time. So for those of you who have seen the interviews, which are really, in essence, my recall of my interview with him, that this should add to it. And for those of you who have not already seen the interviews or have not seen all three, and there will be more coming in the future if circumstances are provided, I really highly encourage you to do so. And thank you for your support of Project Camelot. We are running on donations pretty much exclusively at this time, with the exception of selling some DVDs. So however you are able to support this work, it is very helpful when you do donate, simply because my time is completely wrapped up in trying to disclose truth to people out there. And without your support, I simply would not have the time to do this. So there's that. On top of it, I want to say that I want to thank Joanne Richards for her dedication and support during these interviews, and also Mark Richards, of course, for his dedication and service to humanity. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.